Hello, everyone. I'm Ann Huffman. I'm the chair of Kalen's Dissertation Committee. And on the behalf of the committee, we're so pleased to welcome all of you here to hear about Kalen's research and all the hard work she's put in on her topic. It's wonderful to see the support. I first met Kalen in a quantitative research class that I was teaching, not actually even in East-West psychology. The class was in the PsyD department here at CIIS. And Kalen had joined the class to deepen her knowledge on quantitative research as well as continuing to build on her love of qualitative research. So we had long been in correspondence. So I was very honored when she asked me to be her chair to support her in her journey towards her doctorate. I'm also grateful to the committee members, Stefan Julich, who is also from CIIS, and our wonderful expert outside reader, Brianne Foz, who's also joined us. So I think we've been an incredible team to have been part of Kalen's journey. So without further ado, I'd like to turn over the presentation and the evening over to Kalen.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I am honored and blessed to have this team support me and to have all of you here as I share my research. So we will begin. And Jonathan, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Today is an introduction and a conversation about the perverse feminine archetype, which I developed through a qualitative inquiry of intuitive inquiry. So let's begin. Okay, so today's flow, it's approximately 50 minutes. We're going to go either 10 minutes before or 10 minutes after. So let's see how we do. It's going to go into the topic development, the theoretical framework, the research design, the results, and the implications. So let's start with my positionality. I am a white-bodied cisgender woman born in the United States, which comes with a certain amount of privilege and perspective that I bring to this research topic. I am also an intimate partner violence survivor, so I bring that trauma into the inquiry, which through this process, I've been able to heal in ways that I never imagined were possible. So the question of why do I continue giving my power away was really at the forefront of this inquiry in my own personal life. And through my education within EWP, I work with the Jungian framework. So that gives me a certain lens. And as we go through the topic, you will understand how the archetypal lens factors in. So with this in mind, with my positionality in mind, there are certain ways to mitigate the bias, if you will. So we have the bracketing of assumptions, which is taking the layers of all of my assumptions and biases and attempting to put them outside of the research. That being said, intuitive inquiry really emphasizes the subjective and the objective as one. So there's an inability to separate the researcher from the research itself. And using intuitive inquiry allows those factors to come into place. So we acknowledge what the biases are, and we work with them as we gain insight into the inquiry. So the question of why is relevant here. I've already discussed a little bit about my personal connection to the topic, and that unfolded as I started to engage in a deeper sense of healing and searching for a form that would address my internal dichotomy or binary sense of self. So I would notice how there would be a conscious belief and an unconscious belief that would be in a dichotomy or a disposition that I wanted to break free from. However, I couldn't find a container to hold me in that. Even an archetypal level, there wasn't a specific way that would allow me to enter into my own healing that was not rooted in a patriarchal system. So it started there by seeing this gap, and then continuing to go into the topic allowed me to understand how sexism and internalized sexism really create this cycle to perpetuate the system of oppression. So that is the societal or the collective aim that I'm looking at. And then through synchronicities and different intuitive pings, I was able to get deeper into the topic. And theoretically, again, back to that gap of how do we address the gap? So in intuitive inquiry, we have, it's an inductive framework, which means it is led by a curiosity, a question. And through that question and through the data, we can develop a theory. The theory, it's not a hypothesis and I'm proving a hypothesis. It is the data-driven, the participant-driven theory. So with that in mind, I was interested in how could I integrate the archetypal knowledge that I have with this idea of internalized sexism. So I came up with these questions of, first, what is the perverse feminine archetype? How, and then how does internalized sexism impact the psyche? That allowed me to start to question, can these two work together? Can the perverse feminine archetype, once we define it, address and potentially heal internalized sexism? So before we get deeper into the topic development, I just want to supply a little bit of information about how intuitive inquiry works. This is important because unlike other types of research, intuitive inquiry really holds the entirety of the process. So if we look at imaginal dialogue, active imagination, and in cycle 1, that began for me about a year and a half ago. So prior to doing the research, prior to even settling on this specific topic, I had engaged with this archetype without recognizing it fully. And once I started on this journey, I began to piece together these bits of what the topic really is for me. So we won't go deeply into this due to the time bounds of today. However, as we go deeper, it's important to understand how these cycles, they are a spiral. So they build upon each other and they are integrating in a relational way that goes back and forth. So as you see here, we have cycle 2 of developing preliminary lenses, and that would be the literature review and conversation with theorists and the research that is already present in the field, and then going into the data, coming up with, okay, what did we find in the data? And then revising that and going back into cycle 2 again and continuing to refine that process until we get our results and final implications. So the first cycle, again, is that topic development. And that begins with this intuitive process. So within intuitive inquiry, it's profound in a way that it incorporates the heart and in the mind. And it does so in a way that prescribes intuition at the forefront of this development. So these are just different ways that the intuition is present throughout the entirety of the research. And through that intuition, there is I came across this piece that was sticky for me, and we hear of the dark feminine, which is this idea of going into the shadow and being able to heal what has been put into the psyche or cause complications. And I was not satisfied with that idea of the dark feminine, not only because it continues to place certain characteristics into the dark, and it also continues to imply that darkness is kind of this negative thing. And when we consider people of color and how, for instance, feminism has really been focused on the white experience, I want to get away from anything that has to do with light, dark, white, black, none of that. So let's go with the perversity, and let's go and combine those with perverse of anything that is away from the norm or what is good or traditional, and feminine. And when we combine that, not only do we have this idea of the perverted feminine, so how the feminine has been perverted, but the perverse feminine, which is how those things are incorporated or internalized in the psyche. And working with those two concepts, we can start to see how this idea of feminine, if we think of an archetype, is coming forth through a projection or an archetypal image. So a great example of the archetype in the archetypal image is the mother. Collectively, we can have an idea of what the mother is. However, on a personal level, that representation of mother can be a slew of different things that are unique to us. So that is the difference between the archetypal image and the archetype. And for Jung, the archetypal image is a potentiality of conscious integration of the archetype itself. So with that, I'm building on Jung's framework here to address the cycle of sexism, which is this idea of you have the overt sexism, which we see in media, objectification, commodification. We see the rape culture, violence against women, sex trafficking, etc. And then how the messages that are integrated or imbued into that sexism are internalized, and we can call that internalized sexism or covert sexism. And this is a process of where the oppression, the overall oppression is internalized. So those who are oppressed become their own oppressor. So that can be internal dialogue or behaviors or ways that, for me, for instance, if I say, I am liberated sexually, or I believe in supporting other women in their sexual freedom, and then I judge a woman for expressing herself sexually, then that is this push and pull of that internalized sexism. So for me personally, I've chosen the archetypal image of Lilith to understand and integrate the perverse feminine. And I've chosen Lilith for several different reasons. On a personal note, I am a Jewish woman, and I am interested in going into my ancestry and understanding how I can place Judaism through this feminist lens. So it was exciting for me to understand this mythological presence of Lilith. And then the most important part, though, is that Lilith as a myth has been present since Babylonian times. And she continues to be this presence in society, and not only throughout history, but also specifically in this context, we're looking at the Jewish myth presented in the alphabet of Ben Sira around 700 Common Era. And there are so many ways that the myth encapsulates how sexism has been present and how it can be internalized. The story, in a very short summary, is that Lilith was the first wife of Adam who asserted herself sexually. And because she did this and she said no, she was banned from the Garden of Eden, demonized, and she became this she-demon, femme fatale, witch, sorceress, succubus, whose intent was to steal the sperm of men and create her demon babies so she can wreak havoc and just be evil. So she has represented this idea of the woman who is autonomous, the woman who says no, as evil, as wrong, as distorted, as demonized, and as perverse. And not only does this myth allow for that container to occur, but it also is present in the feminist world as a symbol of that empowerment and that autonomy. So I engage with the Lilith myth as a way or a framework or container to hold the historical backing of sexism through various fields, which that brings us to cycle 2, the literature review. And I just want to mention what emerged out of the literature review, which is that dialogue with the community or with current theorists of, we have different brackets of how Lilith is really engaging all of them. We have feminist spirituality, which we're the goddess movement, dark feminine, the witchcraft, different ways to hold religion. We have Lilith herself, which has not only been a mythological interest in the religious sense, but also in psychological theory. So there have already been many scholars who have engaged with Lilith in the frame of Jung through the shadow and through this archetype. And then feminism, I engaged with a lot of postmodern feminists who can give me that frame of how gender is potentially distorted and questions of the woman and what is the woman and how can this be engaged in today's contemporary society. And then we have the archetypal and the post-feminist Jungian theorists, the methodology of both intuitive inquiry and later narrative. And then psychology, we're holding that space of the internalized oppression. So as I engage with that cycle 2, I started to understand how the different buckets that Lilith represented with this idea of perverting the feminine. So how the feminine has been perverted. And it starts through that natural system of the patriarchy and then engaging with sexism. So how those two play together, and then they emerge through these different fields of religion, where we get the witch hunts, we get the witch craze, we get the idea that women are crazy and evil through religion. And that moves into the media, not only in today's media consumption of television and film and magazines and social media, but in myth and in story, and in how that distortion has occurred specifically in the Western lens. And then psychology feeds into that religion of what I just mentioned of women are crazy, women are evil. And that's when this idea of the wandering womb, which is taking the physical body and creating this idea of hysteria, or the woman, because of her body and because of her womb, she is quote unquote crazy. And then later in hysteria actually was in the DSM until around 1983, which then, interestingly enough, borderline personality disorder started to emerge at that same time. And there are different feminists who speculate that this is a response of the sexist reality, the oppressed reality. I'm sure not all the time, but this is a theory. And then we see in business and politics where the women are bitchy, women are stupid. There's throughout the participant interviews, there was a lot of insight into how they felt that they were just weak as leaders, not even from an internal way, but because that societal pressure or that external idea of weakness really was holding them back from being able to be leaders. And we get this idea of, let's say, women are bitchy. We have the Hillary Clinton campaign and how Hillary Clinton was seen as both a witch and also very, very much categorized as this harsh, aggressive bitch. Why can't she be more traditionally feminine? I had friends who identify as women who would make comments like that. And then we have Sarah Palin of this idea of, okay, here is the quote unquote hyper masculine traditional feminine. And it's the same, there's no slack there. There is still this idea of, okay, she is hyper feminine and she is stupid and she is weak. So where does this dichotomy lead us? Where does this distortion of the feminine create an internal psychic distortion? And that is when I start to really understand, okay, the perverse feminine is this oppositional idea from the traditional or the divine feminine. And that was corroborated throughout the interviews as well. And here is this fragmentation or this binary pole of, I can either be logical or I can be emotional. I cannot be both at the same time. And I just want to speak about Judith Butler for a moment, and gender performativity, and all of this information is really built off of her theory of gender performativity, which is this idea that if I want to be a fill in the blank, a man, then I have to be masculine. And being masculine means that I go by these different rules of what masculinity can and can't be. So that is the mask that is worn, or that is the way this hypothetical game is played. So when we get to cycle 3, this is the starting the juice of it. So this is that return arc of the intuitive inquiry where I can begin to interview the participants. So simply put, convenience and snowball sampling is just being able to find online forums, go to my school, friends, and then the snowball effect is them helping by bringing in their people that they know for the participants. So I interviewed 15 cisgender women, age 30 and over. I included the cisgender piece, not only because of my personal experience, but because of the specific internalization of those gender norms at a very young age. And then for me, I chose women who I felt represented the perverse. So those who live on somewhat of a fringe or an alternative way of life. And then I was interested in a diverse range of opinions. So I found those who both identify as feminists and anti-feminists as well. Limitations and delimitations. I won't go too deeply into this because we're flying by here, but the biggest limitation that is present in this research is race. And I did not purposely only recruit a certain color, but the interesting thing was the main population who came to me were white women. And I found that interesting because women of color are situated at this intersection of oppression, not only of racism, but also of sexism. And how can they have the privilege to even speculate about internalized sexism? And there needs to be more work in that space. So that was a large limitation here. Interview protocol, it was on video conferencing, focused on feminist phenomenology, and those interview questions were really fluid in nature. So I had the semi-structured where it would flow with each participant based on their story. And this was the analysis timeline. The most relevant or important information here was that I went through thematic analysis over and over and over. And I came to a point of understanding that, oh, wait a second, these themes, not only are they not separate, but they are telling a story. So what is the arc of the story? And what is being said here? So that's when I finally got to this point of storytelling, which allowed me to break open a framework. And that brings us to the results. So through the results, I'm going to introduce the participants. We're going to go through the framework overview, and then the question again of what is the perverse feminine archetype begins not only from my perspective, but now it's from the participant perspective. So I'm not going to read every single quote here. And I just want to introduce you to the participants. I'm using a pseudonym, and we're just saying, okay, here's one quote. You burn me at the stake, I come next life. I reincarnate and I'm here again. Try it again, burn me again. Let's see what happened. I'm still here. And these types of these quotes magnify the influence of this topic, not only on that participant's life in the day-to-day, but throughout the interview. So I wish we had time to go through each and every one of these quotes, but we will pick out another one. So the idea of power and subservientness was my identity. So understanding that internalization has become an identity, that has become a distorted identity of what someone can or can't be. So now we get to the framework, and the framework is one that builds on each other. So each of these stages not only are intertwined, we see bits and pieces in each of them, but they also build. So we have this stage of indoctrination, which happens in early upbringing. Those are the external messages. Stage 2 is the shape-shifting. So the way that there's this coping mechanism that occurs that participants may have believed that they were putting on a show or creating a mask, but really that became them, or who they believe themselves to be. And then we get to the awareness, not only in the interviews of epiphanies and different ideas that came up that are very exciting and we'll go through, but that awareness started to shift and started to say, okay, how do I redefine this idea of a woman for myself? So the first one is stage 1, indoctrination. And through this, we have different sub-themes: ingrained feminine expectations, which is this expectation of traditional femininity; dehumanization, where there's an objectification, a commodification of the body and a shame of the body, and even in a natural sense of, I hate having my period, I think it makes me weak, those types of responses throughout interviews. And then codependency, fostering this idea that I have to have a partner. There were several stories of in childhood being taught that it's great to have a man's sexual attention, even though I'm 8. My mother is encouraging me to seek out male attention. And again, this is a heterosexual norm that they're facilitating. And then the mixed messaging of, I have to be feminine, I have to be girly, which is often associated with being crazy and too emotional. So because of that, I have to be masculine as well. I have to, masculine meaning I am not allowed to show emotion because then I'm weak. So this constant back and forth, and this beautiful quote of forcing women into one box that they have to sit in and they can't escape is a perversion. It's a perversion of the soul. So in this state, the participants really went into their childhood, and how that created this personality, or this understanding of identity, where she becomes this shell of a person based on what society needs from her, based on what her parents need her to really become those external messages. Here's another quote. When I was 7 or 8 years old, my father said, "My biggest frustration is not having a son, because a woman will never achieve what a man will achieve." And this participant discussed this and all of the pain that this brought her. And she said in this moment, she realized not only was it shameful to be a woman, but that she used it as a motivation. And that's something I saw a lot in these interviews, is that the idea, or the suppression or the oppression of the self becomes this motivation of, okay, well, I'm going to prove them wrong, and I'm going to use that as my device to be able to survive. And that's where we get the shape-shifting. So the shape-shifting is being able to kind of be a chameleon and manipulate situations based on survival. So we have the damsel in distress, which is the playing weak, playing as if, okay, I need a man, I need somebody who's better, who's stronger than me to help me so I can get what I want. And that comes into this like the idea of self-doubt, of really negating the idea of confidence and the ability to understand the self or become who she wants to become. And then the unhealthy boundaries, which is related to that codependency. And from all of that, we get a limitation of an aspiration. Several participants mentioned that they're not even interested in continuing education or continuing their career because they know inherently that they will never be whatever they think they need to be in society, or they will never have that power. So here's a quote: I rarely hear somebody describing a woman as feminine because there's this expectation that if you are biologically or you identify as female, you must be inherently feminine. And for this quote, she's telling the story of how the difference between feminine and woman. And it was interesting in the interviews because I asked that question: what is the difference between feminine and women? And every single participant said there is a big difference. They're different. One is an energy, one is a physical way of being or an identity. But then when I asked them, okay, what is the specific difference? They were unable to parse them apart because there's this association of traditional femininity with womanhood. So when she tries to survive or when she goes through this process, she internalizes it so much that she fragments her personality and it becomes this distorted sense of self and a performance rather than a holistic idea of being. So the concept of traditional feminine or the divine feminine is the perfect, harmonious female who can glide in and out of all situations and has a tremendous capacity for adaptability, which I think is sort of inhuman. It's like an inhuman model of being a woman. And that idea of this model of being a woman for this participant's name, Lilith, she found herself, she came with this incredible term of emotional perfection and learning at a very young age that she had to be emotionally perfect, which means no jealousy, no sadness, no anger, no passion, no drive, no ability to assert autonomy. So when that, 30 minutes, got it.
Go, keep going.
When that seeps into the psyche, there is this incredible detachment from the idea of a sense of self. And as we were going through the interviews and piecing this gritty material apart, there was this distinct awareness or this shift of perspective that started to arise that was very exciting for me to witness, of a desire to shift the reality, a recognition of here are the internal parts of me that I am negating, and I want to change that. So there will always be some kind of divide where I'm always kind of walking a line, but the degree of awareness maybe changes. So participants are starting to understand that they have this awareness. They know that, okay, we may not be able to get rid of the binary or the fragment. That will take time. But as long as we continue to strive for awareness, we will be able to start to piece this apart. And that comes from the idea that of, okay, I am going to start to break away from the status quo. And we have this beautiful quote around sexuality and understanding that sexuality is not just part of being in a partnership with someone else. I have the ability to be sexual or confident or creative or artistic just for me and no one else. And that is a source of power. So they're starting to realize that this is a way that they have marginalized themselves and break away from that, both again in the interviews as well as as they're telling the story of their life. last stage is that redefining of womanhood. And we have this idea of rebellion and confronting this shadow and starting to look at autonomy in all of the myriad of ways that autonomy can be expressed. So all of these characteristics that have been deemed bad or shadow, I'm tired of holding all of this shame for the world. It's not on me to hold all of this shame. You guys gave it to me. I'm not keeping it anymore. So it's that determination to say, no more, no more. I'm going to say no. I'm going to learn how to understand myself. I'm going to follow the spiritual path that I wish to follow. I'm going to be in community that supports me. And I'm going to embrace these things that you've deemed shame, you meaning society, have deemed shameful. So Persephone is talking about she had to leave for myself. I had to change my situation and environment entirely to something more positive for myself, and then find confidence to strengthen myself. And in this, she's talking about being a queer woman and being a child and misunderstood and forced to go through this heterosexual debacle of her parents trying to change her. And she tried so hard to get them to accept her, and they never did. So she just had to leave. And that is a common theme throughout these stories, is just leaving and deciding no more. So the perverse feminine archetype, it holds many different spaces. It holds a space of what is that feminine image, that archetypal image, and that way of being or that identity. And it also holds a space of this framework of transformation. And for this, perversity feels like I am the masculine version of the feminine energy that the masculine doesn't approve. Not only the masculine in society or the patriarchy or sexism, but also the idea of masculine as superior within, in that internalization of it. So defining this archetype, we're looking at the spectrum of perversity. So perverse feminine can be the idea of what I laid out originally of, okay, an autonomous, that Lilith figure of someone who breaks away from the traditional being. And if I am someone who, like many of the participants, despise traditional feminine, maybe that's perverse. Maybe being a quote unquote girly girl who loves pink is perverse. And that was something that changed for me as I started going through this research of oh, okay, I had this bias of what I wanted, what I thought perversity was. And really it's this spectrum based on the binary that I have internalized, and I'm going to the oppositional way. And it's also greeting those demons or those shadows and meeting them, and not only confronting them, but integrating them as a source of power. And then this ability to not necessarily be balanced, but be able to mitigate those internalizations that have come early on. So this is a beautiful quote of, I asked each participant, what is the perverse feminine? And this quote, it would be countercultural and feminine. Our conversation has led me to this. After digging around, it would be welcoming jealousy and the malignant form. It's bringing those seemingly negative attributes into a positive light and sorting them back into this feminine space. And she talked a lot about the idea of the witch, and many participants come back to the witch as a source of power in this, as bringing those demonized parts to the surface and starting to utilize them for power. So taking that perverted feminine, flipping it on its head to the perverse feminine and yielding that power. So the belief that there is a cage or there's an entrapment, that is the internal dichotomy that's happening. But when participants start to recognize and gain awareness, they start to see that they have this capacity to change their reality. And this quote is talking about that capacity, as well as the recognition that that society and the individual are one and the same. And how do we start to parse that apart and heal it. The last cycle is solidifying the results and developing implications. So again, utilizing the mind, utilizing what has been deemed wrong as part of the gift. So in this cycle, as I mentioned early on, we're looking at what were the previous themes and what were the final themes. In my previous themes, these were all represented throughout the participant interviews. However, I didn't understand that there's a larger umbrella that happened, and that created this framework or this ability to see, oh, these are nestled within the final themes of the framework. And then we revisit the research questions. The first one being, what is the perverse feminine archetype? And that is both a healing framework and an identity to embody. And then how does internalized sexism impact the psyche? It fractures the psyche and distorts the personality and creates this fragmented sense of self. And then how can we utilize the perverse feminine to potentially heal internalized sexism? And that is by incorporating these tangible, actionable steps for transformation. So we talked a little bit about the unexpected results, and I just want to touch on that one more time. We went over the fact that this is a spectrum. This isn't just A, B, C linear type of result. This is a cycle. And that framework builds into each other, and it also shifts around based on the individual. It's very much of that archetypal plane of existence where not everything is laid out in one box. There's also the Lilith myth that I recognize as a bias within myself, because the Lilith myth was written in a way that continues to put the feminine nature in this dichotomy of, okay, she was a goddess, she was kicked out, she was demonized, and now she's powerful. Well, what about that middle section? What about the part of the shadow, or integrating the gray area, or allowing the anger to come out? So that in me, I was seeing how this idea, this archetypal image of autonomy and power was really missing a piece. And that piece of being able to be messy and emotional needs to be there. And so because of that, the other portion of this is indoctrination. So as women were telling me stories of their early childhood, I became angry, and I was very touched by a lot of these sexist stories. And then through time, as they continued, I started to realize, oh, their upbringing was actually trying to prepare them for the system. It wasn't necessarily a abusive scenario. It was more of a, okay, let's prepare you for the reality that you're about to meet. And then I transformed exponentially through this, not only by confronting my own internalization of sexist beliefs and thoughts, but also starting to pull apart the ways that I'm currently living my life that are under this, I guess, this cloud or this haze of being, and how have I developed myself in that way? And then the implications. There are 4 that I'm laying out here. So there's a self-help community of being able to engage with this framework on an individual level, and how people of my hope, any gender, any identity, any color, can start to engage with this material on a personal level. There's a future research of clearly bringing in more diversity and inclusion is very important to be able to create a sustainable theoretical framework. So future research that builds upon mine and takes those limitations and starts to fill in the gap. And then the spirituality aspect. A lot of these participants were very engaged in their own alternative spiritual practice, which brought them a lot of autonomy and gave them a capacity to deepen their understanding of their own identity outside of what has been put on them. And then there's a potential of clinical practice. So the hope is that both through one-on-one and group practice, this can be utilized as a way to better understand patients and be able to facilitate more transformation. And these are my references. I expect you to read every single one. And that's it. Thank you.
Kalen, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. It was articulate and cogent, and it really led us through your process and your thinking and really laid out the theoretical framework and the cycles of the perverse feminine. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. And I know your work very well. So it was exciting to gain new insights from this perspective.
Thank you.
I'd love to open up to questions from the committee, and I'd like to invite Dr. Brianne Foz to start us off with some questions, please.
Oh yeah, this is so great. I just want to say again how polished and wonderful that presentation was. And oh my gosh, even your slides are just so beautiful. Anyway, I love this project. And I have to say it's, I've been on many dissertations over the years, and I rarely see anyone put as much of themselves in their work as this particular project did. And it's just like, so I just feel like it's very unique, and I just want to like mark that before I ask these questions, because it's, a lot of times I think when you're a PhD student, you're sort of trained to be distant from your subject, or to try to, to choose some narrative of respectability or professionalism at the expense of having your being invested in your work. And I think, Kalen, you did not fall into that trap at all. And I think the project really like thrives in part because you put so much of your own skin into it, right? It just really feels like it's made of your skin. And I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to say that first. Yeah, so I have many questions, but the one that really stands out to me just when I was listening to your presentation and thinking about this earlier today too is, this kind of, I'm interested in hearing you think about the relationship between healing and the sort of framework of social transformation, justice, sort of anti-racism, like, fighting against patriarchy. It feels like your participants are really also grappling with that an awful lot. And I wanted just for you to kind of think about how we see those things interfacing, right? Because I feel like one of our tasks as clinicians is to kind of facilitate patients through the process of healing, but also justice frames. And I think, the perverse feminine really is like a nice bridge there. So I just like to hear you kind of think about that relationship, because it feels really like it oozes from this work and from you and, all of these other parts of the project. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I love the love here. It's so wonderful. So you were absolutely right. And there's a term I explored today called, what was it? Now transformative, societal transform. It was like, now I'm forgetting it, of course. Anyway, in my belief, and in also with the Jungian lens, the collective and the individual it's like a breathe in, breathe out, macro, micro type of experience that within, if understanding how there was that idea of the overt sexism and the covert sexism, and how these two are playing a role with each other, and how can the individual, as they transform themselves, begin to interact with the world differently, begin to create a process where not only are they quote unquote waking up to this injustice that has been internalized, but they're also starting to treat others differently, show up differently, hopefully start to create a container of justice. And that is from the psychological standpoint of, as we start to shift our mindset, we start to interact with the world differently. And that is really my hope here. And for me, as I was doing this research, I'm just like, patriarchy, sexism, oh my gosh, these are so big. And then what is my way in? It's through the self. It's through, you can call it individuation or transformation or healing. And through that process, I can start to bring more of myself into the societal change and the activism. Does that answer the question?
I think that's really good. Totally. And I mean, it really also makes me think of the way that we so often think about healing and justice as somehow different. Like we are a culture that divorces those two things, and that also feels like a consequence of patriarchy to me. And so I'm also wondering what you think about that too. Like, why is this not more of an intuitive link that we have? And how and why do these concepts seem to get divorced from each other? You know, whether it's on the ground doing therapy or even in research, right? Like I'm impressed with your methodologies that way too, that you're really learning and growing from your participants and engaging with them in a sort of different methodological frame than a lot of times happens too. But anyway, healing and justice feel like they need to be in conversation. So I'm wondering why they aren't. And just if you could riff on that a little, and then I'll pass the baton over over to your other committee members.
You're asking questions of the philosophical meaning of life. What do we do? No, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's so clear, but it wasn't clear before it was clear, if that makes sense. So as I started engaging with my own psyche and with the Jungian work, I was stumbling upon this block that is very much what you're talking about, of how do I make use of this work in the world through myself. And it is, I feel, I mean, well, this is not research based, this is my own opinion, but like I feel like it's much easier to compartmentalize things in life. For me, especially, as if I'm just talking about my experience as like with trauma or the internalized oppression, a way to cope with that is to compartmentalize. And I kind of see that a little bit in the shape-shifting stage of things, of the need to say, okay, well, I'm going to be the sexy woman here, or I'm going to be the pure woman, or I have to be this, or it's like a constant negotiation of the self. And there's also in the spiritual lane of looking at the non-binary and the non-linear and that type of world. And that's why I think the archetypes and the Jungian framework held this so well, because with that psychological theory, we're looking at this ability to touch all of the pieces with that archetype. So I can't answer the question fully, and I think that's the point. We don't know fully. Like there's much more research out there that I am not familiar with, but that's why I'm doing this work, is leaving it with that question of how can we start to bridge that gap, and how can we start to create a world where we understand how they're so interconnected, the healing and the societal work. And that's really my hope. I didn't answer your question, but I don't know if you needed a full period.
No, that was good. That was great. Yeah. Love it.
Thanks for those questions.
Stefan, we're going to hand the baton over to you for your questions.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Kalen, I don't have any questions. I just want to reflect that, I'm in my position until very recently as the program manager for East West. I was usually the first person that people would come into contact with in the program. So for the last 5 years, I've been able to watch people kind of progress from where they where they were when they entered into the program. Many of them exiting the program, some of them still in it, working on their dissertations or for however long it takes them. And I just, I just want to say that I had my particular experience of you has been really extraordinary. I think that you're an extraordinary individual. You came with vulnerability, with authenticity into the program. You were never shy to be exactly who you were, no matter how much you struggled in the program. Looking for the kind of support that you felt that you needed, sometimes not getting it, or feeling that you weren't getting it. And yet you were, you're a Capricorn. I know Capricorns because I am one. We're goats, and we just keep heading up that mountain. We pick our path and we just keep going. And with dogged determination, you went from coming in rather green to turning yourself into an excellent scholar and academician and researcher. This project was amazing. Your presentation was extraordinary. I just want to echo what Brianne said. It was beautiful to look at, extraordinarily clear, and I'm just really impressed. I don't have any questions about the project. The questions that I had, you got from me, in kind of a huge download in the writing process. I guess I have a question. I'm kind of curious what's next. Where do you take this next? Because one of the things that we learn, in writing at an academic level, especially at the student level, is the mantra of that's a very interesting question, but I can't go into it here because there isn't enough space. So I'm kind of curious where you take this, and if I can just offer maybe one way to frame it. There was one point during your presentation where you said something like your notion of what perversity was changed as a result of the interviews, that for one individual it might be something completely different than for another individual. Can that be expanded so that this notion of blowing up the binaries can move even beyond your research in the perverse feminine and be applied into other areas of personality development and cultural and social issues?
I love that. Absolutely. It's funny. Blowing up the binary is a funny term, because early on in this research, I did want to do just that, and I was just like non-binary, non-linear. And then I had a discussion with Debashish, and he said, well, sometimes we need the categories, or we need the framework of understanding, and because otherwise I was arguing myself out of having any words for anything, and that wouldn't work for research. So what if we were to take this outside of this idea of perversity, and we're just looking at this binary, if we're the binary of I am hanging out, if we have a spectrum of whatever we want to call it, a dog and a cat, we have the spectrum. Where do I sit on that spectrum? And then just figuring out, where do I sit? Am I a dog who wants to be a cat? Well, how do I become a cat? This is obviously not possible, but let's just play with the idea of, how do I become a cat? I'm going to move on to the opposite end of the spectrum, and I'm going to incorporate what I believe as completely different from myself, and try that on and become that. And then can I then create a more holistic sense of being that is not just hanging out on one side of the binary, and I'm moving through this idea of the dog and the cat, and it's becoming I guess holistic is a good word for that. And I believe Jung has a theory for that, which is, giving the mic to you, the theory of going into the opposite. Oh,
the enantiodromia.
Yes. So I am not too familiar with this. However, that is where I'm going with this idea going into that opposite way of being as a means to maybe not blow up the binary, but start to dismantle it, and then becoming in a space of the non-binary eventually. But even saying the non-binary is creating a binary between the binary and the non-binary. So how do we get out of that frame of thinking? I don't know. And I think your question again, it's like what Brianne was saying of like, well, these are questions, and this is the point of research. It's not to put a period at it at the end. It's to put a question mark and to continue and to find the limitations and find the gaps and say, okay, for me, my bias got in the way of this. Great. Now I know that data point and I'm going to work with it. So again, these questions are big and they leave us with more questions. So thank you.
Jung kind of, in his kind of structural way of looking at things, he said we're moving from the age of Pisces, which is the age of the warring brothers, as he put it, the two fish that are in eternal conflict with one another. That's the binary way of being, to the Aquarian age, where the Aquarian individual is the one that carries that water, the urn on their shoulder. They're carrying their own spirit within them. They're becoming integrated. And this happens naturally over the course of time. But I see work such as yours and the work that many of the students at our school that are doing is kind of pushing into a new paradigm. So I want to thank you, because I really think that you've done excellent work. I want to congratulate you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Kalen, I want to echo both what Brianne and Stefan have said, visually beautiful, well illustrated, just engaging and excellent and well paced. So practice is paid off. But, I also want to circle back to something, we had engaged in a lot of early conversations around method. And, I really want to laud you, because one of our conversations was around, my, holding this space and letting you know that intuitive inquiry is going to work you more than you are going to work the method. And I just think, you articulated it so clearly in your dissertation as well as in your presentation, that one of my hopes is you write an article on using the method and the ways in which it can be used to, expand and transform. And I know Rosemary Anderson has written extensively around using intuitive inquiry as transformative, but I think the way you approached, embodied, wrestled with, got really mad at the process. And I think, as Brianne said, the bringing the whole self and getting messy, because there is this idea that somehow that in the academy, we should be above, and we should have some sort of way of holding our work and what we do that isn't fully representative or isn't our, part of our full self. And I think, and I hope that, for all the participants who have been able to join us, that this work has, perhaps given you an aha moment and had a transformative piece. But out of all of this, I'm curious, because, and I think you touched upon this, was there also a collective transformative piece for the participants as well? And were they able to share shifts or moments with you around that?
Thank you. And just to your first point, yes, the intuitive inquiry, as you said, it works through you, and that it worked through me. And at one point I was, and you know this because I came to you very frustrated and just like, how am I supposed to find these themes? These themes are all interconnected. What is happening? And I consulted with everyone in the committee actually around this. And then finally it was like, no, wait a second, just follow the flow of this process. And then once I put myself or my need to be objective or scientific or respected aside, that's when it came through me the most. So absolutely wrestling with that process of deconstructing myself in a way because of that method. It was, and because it's in that hermeneutical spiral, it gives you that structure. And I think it's absolutely a brilliant way to do research and start to create. In my dissertation, I talked about how there are several, the feminine or the women have been associated with this idea of intuition and emotion. And then the academy is really focusing on the objective and the mind, and intuitive inquiry was important for this because it honored what has been traditionally constructed as a feminine quality, which is obviously just not accurate, but it allowed me to say, I'm going to go into this in the way that is representing this feminist part of it. Okay. And then the question you have of the collective transformation, absolutely. Through that framework that I mapped out, I was witnessing the transformation as it was occurring. So not only was this a narrative piece of them telling the story of their historical life and the different parts of it and how they gained awareness here, or how they left this situation, or how they were treated as a child, and the ways that they cope with life. But in those stories was this, like, through body language, through the way that they shared themselves with me, and even reporting at the end of it saying, thank you. I've never had a space to have this conversation. This is even there was a woman who was in her 60s, and she was, every response she had was, I'm sorry, or it was a lot of ums and a lot of, I don't know, and I continuously reminded her that this is her space to share. And at the end of it, she was speaking without the ums. She stopped apologizing, and she stepped into her own self and her story. And it was fascinating to watch. And each participant had that type of arc, which is what finally validated this framework of, oh, wait a second, I'm watching it in action. And that is really at the root of the collective transformation that occurred, I believe. And it was for me personally to individually transform, and the participant they transformed me in that way. That, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. The inner and outer are inseparable in that sense.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions or anything else? If not, Jonathan, could you create the breakout rooms? And Stefan, did you have something to say? No. All right, then we will hop into the committee will hop into the breakout room, and Kalen will.
Before you go, sorry. Yes. I just want to applaud my committee, because each one of these individuals has been with me through this whole process, and it happened in such an intuitive way and a beautiful way of I tried so hard to find people in the committee, and then I realized they're right in front of my face. So Brianne, I met you when I was 21 as an undergraduate, transcribing your amazing feminist work. And that I still can't even believe that. Stefan, when I pursued this program, you were the person I called on the phone. I don't have a place to stay in San Francisco. What am I going to do? I have a feeling to do this, but what am I going to do? And you said to follow that. And your encouragement led me there. And then Anne, of course, finding you and looking for this research to hold me, and you supplied that and much more, and you helped me understand research in a way I never understood, and I'm just so grateful for you all. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Kalen.
Okay, I'll send the three of you into breakout rooms.
No.
Are they? Just make sure they're gone.
Get out of here.
Stefan is almost gone.
It looks like he's frozen.
Hmm.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, good. Great. Well, fantastic, Kalen. Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. So well done. I can't wait to read the dissertation because I know there's so much more than you were able to get to, and a lot of you were kind of presenting a lot of the tips of the icebergs that really open up, and I can't wait to get into the full work. But at this point, let's open it up for questions from anybody here. You can type into the chat. I could read it out if you would like, or you can unmute and ask Kalen a question.
Yeah, this is Kalen's dad, and I want to say thank you for the aha moments today. You were all great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dad. Thanks for being
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Oh, sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh. Hello, Kalen. This is Omari. I just want to say good job. I was following along. I'm following behind you by about 4 or 5 months. So, good job. As a man, what you talked about just does not occur to me. I just never thought of it in those terms, as a man, and it's like, wow. And then your reference to the experience of women of color at the intersection, if you will, of oppression or racism and sexism, and that's like a whole, another conversation unto itself. So thank you for your contribution to the Academy.
Thank you, Omari. It's so nice to see you here. I'm very happy to, and I can't wait for your defense. And I'd love to come if it's public. So.
Yes, I think it will be, and you will certainly get an email and an invite. Yes.
Amazing.
Diana, were you trying to say something? We couldn't hear you. Do you want to try again?
Are you talking admin here?
Oh,
no.
No, but you can say something if you'd like.
Oh, well, it's Dan and Chris in San Francisco, and Kalen. So well done.
Yeah, brilliant.
Really, really impressive. I understand all the work you did much better now, but loved it. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you both for coming. I love you both, and so happy to have so much support here. It means the world to me.
We love you too. I'm glad. Are both your mom and dad listening in? That's wonderful.
Yes, they're here.
You're our daughter from another mother and father.
I'll take it.
I'm glad we were all able to hear. That was wonderful.
Yeah, that was very special to be able to sit in.
Thank you.
It's Donna. I'm not going to turn my camera on because I was working out, but I just wanted to tell you, I don't have any questions for you, but I was so delighted to listen to the end result of all the work that I know you've put into it. There were many conversations that we had that I was probably absolutely zero help to you. But to see everything come together like this so beautifully, I'm so proud of you. Great job.
Donna, thank you. And you're always, any support, any conversation we have, you are always contributing. So thank you. And thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I wouldn't have missed it.
So much love. This makes me so happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think
you have any questions?
I just have one question, Kayla.
Yeah,
Before
go ahead.
committee. So I guess my question, and again, I've known you and this kind of journey. We were we were accountability buddies in our PhD methods class and our research class, but it's just, I think the topic is so rich, and what you bring to it just continually opens avenues in my mind, aha moments. And one thing that came out today that I was wondering about was how, like, in terms of thinking about the future, in terms of, transformation, healing, social justice, all these aspects in which your work is moving through and moving towards opening to a new future. And I'm wondering how much that depends on getting behind the archetypal image. Because one of the ideas is that, like, even the masculine
Look on here.
blowing up.
Why?
Oh, maybe mute them.
Yeah. So I'm just, this is sort of, I'm grappling with this, and the idea of even like blowing up the binary, for instance, and these ways in which, like you address, it's not necessarily the answer, but in terms of if we're caught in a perpetual recreation with a different image, but some kind of, let's say, dialectical kind of endless, an endless type of cycle rather than a spiral, for instance, right? So even if we redefine an archetypal image in a way that can strategically help us move somewhere, but are we still identifying with an archetypal image, or with an image of ourself, for instance, that is kind of bound to replay out the dialectic in a way, or that kind of closure in on itself? And so the one thing that I found myself gravitating towards was asking the question of the relationship of the self. So Jung would have the idea of the archetype of the self. And I think that this is where I found the kind of a moving piece in your work, because you are coming out of Jung, for instance, but then you're also bringing in post-structural and postmodern thinkers. And so there would be a difference, in my understanding, in the way in which the self is understood between these types of, thinking. And so I just wanted you to maybe think a little, like, just like riff a little bit off of that, in terms of how do you feel that the self, like whether it's an archetype or beyond, like, how is it that we need to engage in a self that can actually open to this type of a new type of a future? So, like, what kind of a self or subjectivity do we need to leave behind? In what ways do we need to redefine even the notion of the self in order to move beyond these problems, And so that's just maybe a big question, but that was what was on my mind.
I knew you would bring an excellent question. So to start with, so Jung does hold the self beyond. So the archetype that I'm working with here is within, let's say, if we're looking at Jung's model, it's within that the collective unconscious is what holds the archetypes, and then the perverse feminine would be in that collective shadow atmosphere. And then if we look at Jung's model, we're looking at the self as this goal of intuition, of individuation. So the archetype would be something we work through. So it'd be the shadow working through, and it wouldn't be the end goal. None of this is an end goal, right? It's all just this play or this flow with ourselves. And then as far as you're saying, the post-structuralist, postmodern, post how that's holding the self, I mean, you would have more experience with that. And it's when reading the feminist theorists around with that lens, it's more of this idea of whole, like I keep using the word holistic because that feels right, to break away from, like, if we're looking at like Donna Haraway's work and how the cyborg is a creation of societal influences, or we're looking at the Yeah, so we're looking at how the woman has been created based on society, based on the collective norms, and that is always the case. That is always the case because there is this inner and outer experience of the collective and the individual. So I think to go into that question of boundaries, or that question of binaries or dichotomies, et cetera, spectrum, there is always going to be a tie there. But the question is, does that tie necessarily mean that there is oppression? Or is there a potential for that tie or those bounds to not necessarily break out of them or become post-human in essence, but can we utilize those boundaries in order to cultivate this idea of what we're calling the self? If we go into spirituality, they would juxtapose it with the soul, and going into that center space of holistic experience where it doesn't necessarily, you use the word need. I don't think I think if you were to say need, it's that need to feel whole within any of these different articulations of the quote unquote self. So how do we journey in that space, and we can be in a boundary, but having that boundary or that label define us is where the issue comes in. So I can decide I want to play this role. I want to play a role of this particular version of me. That's okay, but I can do that. But I know that is not ultimately me. That is me playing this role, and that is an expression of me, but that is not this centerpiece of me. And I'm not going to allow that to define me or hold me or oppress me anymore. I'm going to just play in that area. I don't know if that answers your question, but you always bring these questions of meta understanding. So
Yeah.
I hope that brings some kind of nuance to your.
Love it. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, you definitely took it right into that direction that I felt like that I was leaning anyway in terms of how I grapple with that question. But I love what you said, and I also think a question I don't have the time to ask, but you did bring up shape shifting. So I think that what you said also addresses the idea of this shape shifting is either it's out of the need to survive, but shape shifting can also is necessary, even like you're saying, it doesn't need to be, it can be a strategy to deal with survival, but it can also be a strategy to deal with transformation and health in a different way. There's like different ways of approaching that idea of shape shifting as well, which I thought was
and to go with that, what you mentioned, to address your point about the archetypal image, if you coming to that space of play, understanding where the psyche is and the processes, I can choose an image that is going to, if we look at what I was saying earlier of the spectrum of binaries, of going to that dog and cat example, if I want to, I can play the archetypal image of the cat as a dog, and maybe that's going to offer me a new experience or a new transformation within myself. But it doesn't mean I'm beholden to that. It just means I can. So I think getting beyond the let's say indoctrination part of it and understanding that we have this power to play is really that root of how I'm seeing the self.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Let's hand it back over to Anne.
All right, thank you. Well, Kalen, as chair of your dissertation committee, it gives me great pleasure to let you know that the unanimous decision of the committee is that your dissertation is passed with no changes, and barring paperwork steps and all, it gives me great pleasure, Dr. Kalen Aradia, to welcome you to our ranks.
Right.
So congratulations on a brilliant and excellent piece of work and research.
Everybody can unmute if you would like at this moment.
Yep, now we can have the woohoos and the congratulations.
Congratulations. And thank you for allowing us to be part of this.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you to all the participants who came. It's always wonderful to have all sorts of people support students in this work.
I'm so
Jonathan, I
humbled.
love your shirt.
I'm so humbled that so many people came. I'm just, when I started this, I was like, I'm not inviting anyone. What? I'll have only 3 people. But Stefan encouraged me
The world
to,
needs this work.
Stefan encouraged me to invite people, and I'm so happy I did. I'm so happy. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to my committee. This means the world to me. So.
And Mariah says hello too.
Go celebrate. Do something
Okay.
fun.
Okay.
Yep.
On your orders.
Yay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Kalen.
Thank you.
Congratulations,
Congratulations,
Dr. Kalen. Be well.